My name is Kate Quirk. I'm the Patient Support Coordinator for Neuroendocrine Cancer UK. I also sit on the research committee for the International Neuroendocrine Cancer Alliance. I'm the patient rep for the PET-CT Academy at the Christie, and I sit on the NETO2 trial steering committee. That trial's actually active but not recruiting at the moment. So neuroendocrine cancer patients, as I'm sure you all know, need better drugs. We need them to control symptoms and to improve quality of life and ultimately to cure. But we need global clinical trials and global research. Single centre studies are not going to deliver the sea change that our community desperately needs. It's important that we all live longer, but it's also important to live well. And sometimes researchers forget this. The single most important reason clinicians need to listen to the patient voice, your voice, is because what matters to you may not be what matters to them. So the way forward, there's thousands of medicines available today, and clinical trials are the only way that we know they're safe and effective. Patients need to be involved in the design of clinical trials to ensure that the endpoints meet our needs. And we need patients who are educated and willing and knowledgeable and well-informed to do this. We want a patient-led research partnership working across all stakeholders, and we want researchers to use the patient experience. For example, if you look on clinicaltrials.gov today, there's almost 4,000 clinical trials if you search under the word neuroendocrine. But if you add in the filter UK, it drops right down to 283. And if you add in the word active, it drops down to 144. And some of those trials won't be recruiting right now. So how many of those have had patient involvement in their design? The answer is not many. So this slide is, it's been produced by a gentleman called Jan Geiser, who trains advocates in how to best represent their cancer community. So as you can see, there are so many roles where patients can get involved. And I'm pretty certain that not many of you know how many roles are available. One of the most important here is the language used, because one of the barriers to patients taking part in clinical trials is understanding what's going on in them. The UK's population is famous for being reticent at coming forward. So as you can see, there's lots of roles here, right down from helping write patient information leaflets, which I know Nikki's got a panel of patients taking part with the liver transplant at the moment. And the medics put out some patient information leaflets designed to encourage patient interest in liver transplants. But the information that the medics put out was written in such a way that patient involvement was difficult. So we put it out to the patient community, got the patient feedback about what they wanted, and it progressed from there so that it was much stronger with patient involvement. So as you can see, there's about 50 or 60 roles there where patients could take part and be involved. So what is a clinical trial? Well, clinical trials are the research studies to test new treatments in volunteers, and volunteers is the important part. They demonstrate whether a new treatment is safe, and they must deliver a benefit to the patient. Consent is obviously absolutely necessary. And when that happens, the Food and Drugs Administration, or NICE, approve the new treatment. And one of the ways where our community has been sort of the poor relation is it was only in 1907 that research into neuroendocrine tumours began. But it was almost 80 years before the first clinical trial for our community took place, when a chemo combination called etoposide and 5-FU was proven to give better results than etoposide alone. So 80 years with a bit of inactivity is really not good enough for us. So how exactly do clinical trials test new drugs? Well, each phase has its own goals, and a treatment only moves to the next phase if the results show that the treatment is safe and effective. So the most important factor that researchers must consider is patient safety. And the trial, as it goes along, has to show that the trial is that the benefits are greater than the risks to the patient. So the different phases all take time, a lot of time. So in phase 1, the trial is given a name. And in our community, a lot of the trial names have net in the name. For example, Spinet, Clarinet, Netto2, Netta2. Not always, but that's one of the ways that we can identify that they're for us. And in the beginning, a small number of patients are involved as researchers learn about safety and how the drug works in the human body. They also study the best dosage, and that can be quite tough because too high and obviously adverse events happen quite quickly. Phase 1 trials last less than a year. Phase 2 trials are longer, around 2 years. More patients are involved, and the trial might open in multiple centres. And from our point of view, this is a good thing. So the goal is to learn more about safety, toxicity, and potential side effects. And then we're on to phase 3 if the trial's been successful so far. Things start to get a bit exciting now. More patients are involved, as many patients as can be recruited. And this phase can take between 1 and 3 years. And the goal is to see how well the treatment is working to prevent, diagnose, or treat the disease. The researchers are particularly looking for adverse events and unexpected toxicity. And if successful, this is the point at which the FDA, the drugs agency, will review all the results, which usually takes the longest time. And then they decide whether it's safe to approve it in the public. Phase 4 happens after FDA approval. Doctors can then prescribe the new medication to any of us globally. So this is when it's obviously a good thing, but it doesn't end there. The side effects continue to be reported and collated, and patient safety remains the goal. And this is important for those, for example, who are on Lanreotide. When Lanreotide was first approved, it wasn't known that hair shedding and hair loss was quite a significant side effect, and that it would impact psychologically many members of our community, particularly ladies. Many of you will know that this is definitely a side effect, me included, and it's very significant. So that's been added on to the known side effects that the long-term monitoring has produced. So adverse events, doctors sign up to, if they can't cure us, they must do no harm. So the adverse effects, as I've listed there, many of our community suffer with diarrhea, vomiting, weight loss, etc. You're all familiar with these, but they have to be monitored, collated and reported on. And obviously the worst adverse event is death. So in the UK at the moment, there's 6 UK clinical trials that are considered to matter to our community. Sector, Sorrento, Netta2, Compete, Compose and Aspen. But if you just look underneath, you can see that 4 of those are not currently recruiting in the UK. So this is where it becomes tricky, because obviously we want the clinical trials, we want to take part, but there are other factors impacting on whether the trial is open for us. Sector completed and, and Aspen, Compose is the most promising at the moment because that's open at the Royal Free and King's College. So glaringly obvious for me as a lung net patient is that none of the 6 trials that are considered to matter are for lung net patients. The last one for lung, Spinet, where the efficacy and safety of Lanreotide was assessed. But there's no point doing any of these clinical trials if they end up introducing more toxicity at the expense of efficacy. And this is really important to bear in mind. However, good news, there is one to watch that's coming out of the USA at the moment called Cabinet. It's a huge clinical trial funded by the National Cancer Institute, and it's running across 100 hospitals in patients with advanced pancreatic neuroendocrine tumours and carcinoid tumours. So that opens it up to many, many more of us. It closes in 2025, and then we'll know if the drug, which is called cabozantinib, an oral chemotherapy, which is currently licensed in medullary thyroid and renal cell carcinoma, will be approved for neuroendocrine cancer. And if it is, that will be a major breakthrough. And it's tracking well at the moment. I've put the link in there if anybody would like to go and have a look at that later. So how important is patient input? Well, it's absolutely vital. Patients must be involved in the design of the clinical trials, so that the primary endpoints match what we as patients actually want. Believe it or not all patients want to live longer if quality of life is dramatically reduced. Consider, for example, the dreaded diarrhea. Clinicians might think that 3 or 4 trips to the loo, which I know some of you make daily, is acceptable. But for patients, the reality might be 6, 7, 8 trips to the loo, which plainly is a real factor in impacting quality of life. So the impact of that many trips to the loo can be things like anxiety, depression, isolation, lost confidence, which is a really important one because it stops people going out and living their life. You might then become housebound, and weight loss is usually likely to occur. So if the clinical trial doesn't take into account the primary endpoint from the patient's perspective, it's going to be a pointless trial. Remember, risk versus benefit, and not to mention a waste of money because the average clinical trial starts at £350,000. So patients want to live better, obviously, but we want to live well. We want to enjoy holidays, family celebrations, weddings, etc., but not at all costs. And yet, this slide was produced by one of the medics that takes part in some of the clinical research studies that looks at patient psychology as well. So the complication for our community is there isn't one single endpoint that each category of neuroendocrine cancer patient wants. For example, medics have to select which patients are best for which trials. And this can depend on where your primary site is, your histology grade and your Ki-67 score, your stage at diagnosis, access to drugs. Different countries have different access to drugs, which centre you're treated at, whether you're at a centre of excellence, whether you're just at an oncology hospital, and yes, the cost. Very different in America for private health insurance to the UK, for example. So it's complicated, but that doesn't mean that we can't get involved. What we really have to remember, and make sure that the clinicians and researchers remember, is that clinical trials are for the benefits of patients only, not big pharma, not to progress somebody's career, not for hospital PR. But if we don't speak up and if we don't say clearly what we need, if we don't engage and if we don't advocate, and most of all, if we don't persist, we run the risk of not being included in the design of that one clinical trial, which might just deliver the breakthrough that the neuroendocrine cancer community desperately needs. We have to speak up because we've got to keep patients at the centre of care. Thank you.